My wife looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, and told me I was the only one who could help. She was talking about her brother, Kyle. I thought I was doing a good deed, saving my family from a crisis. I had no idea I wasn't letting in a house guest. I was letting in a virus that would infect my home, my finances, and ultimately consume my marriage. My name is Jason. I'm 42 years old, and my life, up until that point, had been built on a foundation of hard work and quiet stability. I owned a small but successful landscaping company in a peaceful suburb of Denver. My wife, Megan, and I had a beautiful home, 2 great kids, and a life I was profoundly proud of. It was a life I had earned through 16-hour days, calloused hands, and a relentless dedication to building something real. A life I thought was absolutely secure. The first tremor that would eventually bring it all down came on a crisp autumn evening, in the form of a phone call. It was Megan's younger brother, Kyle. He was 28 years old, perpetually finding himself between fleeting gigs, and possessed the work ethic of a sloth on tranquilizers. He had just been downsized from his latest job, which was a polite corporate euphemism for being fired for the 4th time in 2 years. He has nowhere to go, Jason, Megan pleaded with me that night, her voice a carefully calibrated instrument of guilt and sympathy. His apartment lease is up next week. He's completely broke. Just for a few weeks, until he gets back on his feet. He's my brother. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. I had seen Kyle's pattern my entire adult life. His history was a long, unbroken string of broken promises, borrowed money, and abandoned responsibilities. But looking at my wife's face, bathed in the soft glow of the kitchen light, seeing her genuine distress, I couldn't say no. A few weeks, I said, my voice firm, trying to set boundaries even as I felt them crumbling. And he follows our house rules. No loud music, no guests without permission. He contributes to chores. Megan nodded enthusiastically, relief washing over her face. Of course, honey. He's just so grateful. It was the biggest mistake of my life. A mistake that would cost me everything. The first week, Kyle was the perfect house guest. It was unsettling, almost too good to be true. He was polite, he was clean, he even offered to mow the lawn, albeit with a subtle grimace that suggested he hadn't done anything so strenuous in years. He spent most of his time quietly in the guest room, supposedly applying for jobs. It was all an act, a brilliant performance designed to lull me into a false sense of security. The real Kyle, the parasite I knew, emerged in week 2, shedding his disguise like a snake sheds its skin. It started small, almost imperceptibly. Dirty dishes left in the sink after he'd raided the fridge. Loud video games echoing from the guest room at 2 in the morning, shaking the walls. He would go into the refrigerator, pull out a carton of milk, drink directly from it, leaving a trail of crumbs and sticky residue, and then, without a second thought, put it back half empty for someone else to discover. When I mentioned these small infractions to Megan, she'd wave it off with an exasperated laugh. "Oh, that's just Kyle, honey," she'd say, her tone dismissive. "He's just making himself at home. It's kind of sweet, isn't it? He finally feels comfortable." No, it wasn't sweet. It was a small act of disrespect, a subtle signal that the unspoken rules of my house, the implicit social contracts, no longer applied to him. He was marking his territory, testing the boundaries, and my wife was actively dismantling them. I was quickly learning that in my own home, there were now 2 sets of rules, one for me, the provider, the homeowner, and one for him, the freeloading guest. And my wife was the one actively enforcing Kyle's lenient rules against me. This wasn't hospitality, it was an invasion. The small disrespect soon escalated into a full-blown occupation, a siege on my personal space and peace of mind. Kyle started treating my home like his personal frat house, a revolving door for his equally shiftless friends. He began having them over, while Megan and I were at work, leaving a trail of empty beer bottles, discarded pizza boxes, and unidentifiable sticky residues in his wake. I'd come home from a 10-hour day of physical labor, exhausted and covered in dirt, only to find my living room a disaster zone, smelling faintly of stale beer and desperation, and my brother-in-law passed out on the couch, surrounded by crumbs and video game controllers. The confrontation was always the same, a meticulously choreographed dance of manipulation. I would confront him, my voice tight with frustration, telling him his behavior was unacceptable. He would give me a lazy, half-apologetic shrug, a mumbled, "Yeah, sure, man," that held no genuine remorse. And then, invariably, Megan would step in, her voice dripping with defensive anger, turning the tables on me. "Give him a break, Jason," she'd snap at me, her eyes blazing. "He's going through a hard time. He just lost his job. You're the one with the perfect life, the perfect business. A little compassion wouldn't kill you. You're being so hard on him." She wasn't just making excuses for him. She was actively turning me into the villain, the unfeeling, compassionless tyrant who was bullying her poor, downtrodden brother. The gaslighting was so effective, I started to question my own sanity, wondering if I truly was the monster she painted me to be. My own children started to look at me differently, absorbing their mother's subtle disapproval. The tension in the house became a suffocating blanket. Kyle, emboldened by Megan's unwavering support, grew even more audacious. He started smoking in the house, leaving cigarette butts and ash on the living room floor. When I complained, Megan just shrugged. "It's just a little smoke, Jason. It'll air out." The breaking point, the moment I realized I was no longer the king of my own castle, but a mere tenant, came on a Saturday night. Megan and I had been invited to a black-tie charity gala for one of my biggest clients. It was a crucial networking event for my business, demanding absolute professionalism. Before we left, I looked Kyle in the eye, my voice leaving no room for argument. "No guests, Kyle," I said, pointing a firm finger. "Absolutely no parties. The neighbors are sensitive to noise. This is a quiet residential area. Just keep it quiet." He nodded, a look of perfect sincerity on his face, his eyes wide and innocent. "You got it, man. Not a peep. Have fun, guys." We returned home around midnight, exhausted but pleased with the evening, only to find our quiet, residential street transformed into a chaotic carnival. The street was choked with cars I didn't recognize. My front yard was littered with red plastic cups and discarded food wrappers. And two police cruisers, their red and blue lights flashing ominously, were parked in my driveway. My heart stopped. Music was blasting from my house, so loud. The windows were vibrating, shaking the very foundation of my home. The front door was wide open, and dozens of young strangers were spilling out onto my perfectly manicured lawn, laughing, shouting, and even breaking small decorative garden gnomes I had spent hours placing. Kyle had thrown a massive, out-of-control party. A police officer, looking utterly exasperated, intercepted me before I could even get to my front door. He informed me they had been called 3 times by furious neighbors for a severe noise violation and public disturbance. He then informed me that since I was the homeowner, I was the one being cited. I was arrested, put in the back of a police car, still in my expensive tuxedo, while my wife stood on the sidewalk crying, and my bewildered neighbors watched from their windows, their faces a mix of anger and pity, all because of a party I didn't even know was happening, a party thrown by a man I had reluctantly let into my home. And Kyle, he was nowhere to be found. He had apparently slipped out the back door the moment the police arrived, vanishing into the night, leaving me to face the consequences of his actions, to pay his fines, to absorb his shame. As I sat in the back of that police car, humiliated and furious, the reality of my situation finally hit me. This was no longer about a messy house guest or a few bad habits. This was a hostile takeover, and my wife wasn't just a bystander. She was actively enabling his coup, choosing him over me, over our peace, over our children's stability. My anger began to crystallize into something cold and terrifying. The arrest was the final straw for my patience, but it wasn't the final straw for Megan's delusion. I had to pay a $2,000 fine, personally apologize to all of my now furious neighbors, and even compensate them for property damage to avoid formal charges. When Kyle finally slinked back home the next afternoon, looking remarkably refreshed and unapologetic, I was ready to throw him out onto the street, bag and baggage. But Megan intercepted me, her eyes blazing with a protective fury I had rarely seen directed at me. "He made a mistake," she screamed at me before I could even say a word. "He's young. He's hurting. He needs us. And you want to throw him out? After all he's been through, after he lost his job?" The argument was biblical, a volcanic eruption of 2 decades of unspoken frustrations. But in the end, exhausted and defeated, I relented. Not for Kyle, but for what I mistakenly thought was the last vestiges of my marriage. I didn't realize my marriage was already a hollowed-out shell, infested by a parasitic presence. The next escalation was financial, the most insidious form of invasion. I noticed our joint checking account, the account where all my business profits landed and from which all our household bills were paid, was dwindling at an alarming rate. When I asked Megan about it, she became evasive, defensive. "It's just groceries, bills. Things are expensive, Jason. You're always so tight with money." I chalked it up to rising inflation, to the cost of 2 growing children. I trusted her implicitly with our finances, just as I had trusted her with our home. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, sitting in my office reviewing bank statements, I saw it. A single, enormous debit alert, a $10,000 charge from a high-end electronics store. It was a single transaction, a massive, inexplicable black hole in our finances. I didn't panic. The anger I felt was cold and quiet, a chilling certainty settling in my gut. I didn't call the bank. I didn't confront Megan over the phone. I just waited. I finished the day's work with a strange, detached calm. My mind was clear, focused. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I drove home that evening, the bank statement tucked into my briefcase, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. As I walked into the living room, I saw it. A brand new, wall-sized, 8K television, its enormous screen, dwarfing our antique fireplace. The kind of thing you see in a millionaire's home theater, not the modest home of a landscaping business owner. And there, sprawled on the couch in front of it, remote in hand, a beatific smile on his face, was Kyle. My children, usually glued to the TV, seemed overwhelmed by its sheer size, almost intimidated. I said nothing. I waited until the children were in bed, the house finally quiet. Then, I walked back into the living room. Megan and Kyle sitting side by side on the couch, mesmerized by the glowing screen. I held up the bank statement. $10,000, Megan, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, betraying none of the volcanic rage churning inside me. "Explain it." She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Her face hardened instantly, defaulting to her defensive posture. "Kyle needed a new TV," she said, as if it were the most reasonable explanation in the world. "His old one was so small, and I gave him the debit card for emergencies. He's been so stressed, he needed a distraction." "An emergency?" I repeated, my voice rising despite myself, the anger finally breaking through. "A $10,000 television is an emergency? What about our emergencies? What about our children's college fund?" "He deserved something nice," she shot back, her voice matching mine in volume. "He's my brother, and he is suffering. You're just being selfish, Jason." I finally turned to Kyle, who had been sitting there silently, a smug, almost triumphant look on his face, watching the fireworks. "Get out," I said, my voice like ice. "Get out of my house. Tonight. You can't talk to him like that." Megan shrieked, jumping to her feet, placing herself physically between me and her brother. "Oh, yes, I can," I said, my voice a low, dangerous growl. "He is a thief and a parasite, and he is no longer welcome here. That $10,000 he stole, consider it a parting gift. Use it to get an apartment, but get out." I expected a fight. I expected her to defend him. I expected more excuses, more gaslighting. I never, in a million years, expected what she said next. She stood up straight, her face a mask of cold fury, and she pointed a trembling finger at me. "No," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "He is staying. He is my family. If you have a problem with him, then you can leave." The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. My wife was choosing this leech, this destroyer of everything I had built, over me, over our marriage, over our children's future. I looked at her, and I didn't see the woman I had married, the partner I had loved, the mother of my children. I saw a stranger, a zealot in the cult of her deadbeat brother, a co-conspirator in the dismantling of my own life. The argument got heated again. Voices were raised. Accusations flew. But I saw it was useless. I was so overwhelmed with a toxic mix of rage, heartbreak, and utter disbelief that I thought I was going to explode. Instead of screaming, instead of making a scene, I just turned, walked out of the living room, out the front door, and stood on my porch in the cold night air, trying to breathe, trying to grasp the incomprehensible reality of what had just happened. I was outside for maybe 20 minutes, the cold night air doing little to cool the fire in my gut. I tried to process the complete and utter implosion of my entire life, the betrayal that had just been laid bare. When I finally regained a semblance of composure, I walked back inside, and what I saw stopped me cold. In the middle of the living room, in a messy pile, were my clothes, my toiletries from the bathroom, my laptop, my favorite books, and even my pillow from our bed. It was an unmistakable message. On top of the pile was a note, scrawled on a napkin in Megan's furious handwriting. "This is your limit in this house until you learn to respect my brother and allow him to breathe." She hadn't just thrown me out of our marriage. She had physically thrown me out of my own bedroom. She had demoted me from husband to unwanted guest in the space of half an hour, a pathetic pile of my belongings, the monument to her disdain. I looked at the pile of my life, discarded on the couch, and then I looked at the two of them, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me with defiant, triumphant expressions, the enormous new television glowing behind them like a monument to their victory. They thought they had won. They thought they had the house, the money, the power. They had no idea that I wasn't retreating. I was regrouping. And my revenge wouldn't be loud or angry. It would be silent and total. They had evicted me from my home. I was about to evict them from their entire comfortable life. I didn't say a word. The fight was over. There was nothing left to say. I calmly walked over to the pile, found an empty duffel bag I had used for business trips, and began packing the most essential items. My laptop, my work documents, my passport, my essential clothes. They just watched me, a smug silence hanging between us, their eyes filled with contempt. They thought I was just going to the guest room, that I was accepting my new, diminished place in the household, bowing to their ultimatum. When my bag was packed, I walked to the front door. I paused with my hand on the knob and looked back at them one last time. My eyes met Megan's, then Kyle's. I saw their triumph, their cruel satisfaction. "You're right," I said, my voice completely calm, devoid of any anger or pain, a chilling contrast to the chaos of moments before. "I will leave." Then I walked out, closed the door gently behind me, and never came back. That night, I slept in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Denver. The next morning, before the sun had even fully risen, I began my new life. I went to my bank and calmly transferred exactly 50% of the balance from our joint checking account into a new, private account I opened at a different institution. I then called my company's payroll department and instructed them to deposit my salary into this new private account from now on. I contacted my cell phone provider and separated my line from the family plan. I meticulously canceled every single credit card that I was the primary account holder on, including the one Megan had so generously given to Kyle for emergencies. I contacted the utility companies and transferred all accounts into Megan's sole name, effective immediately. I did it all with a strange, liberating sense of detachment, like performing necessary surgery. I was a ghost, systematically erasing myself from the financial life I had painstakingly built for my family. The house was in both our names, yes. They could have it. For now. The mortgage payments, the property taxes, the utility bills, the maintenance costs. All the financial burdens that were automatically paid from the joint account I had just drained were now solely their problem. The first call came from Megan that afternoon. I didn't answer. Then a text. What did you do? The credit card was declined at the grocery store. The power is off. Call me. I deleted it, blocking her number shortly after. Then came a call from Kyle. I didn't answer. Then a frantic text from him. Dude, where are you? Megan's freaking out. The internet just got shut off. I need money. Call me back. I deleted it, blocking his number too. For the next 2 weeks, my old phone was bombarded. Calls and texts from Megan, from Kyle, from her parents, from her sister. A chorus of confused, then angry, then panicked voices, all demanding to know where I was, what I had done, how they were supposed to pay the mounting bills. I never answered. I had disappeared, completely. 2 months later, my lawyer served Megan with divorce papers. The terms were simple, almost cruelly generous. I wasn't asking for the house. I was giving it to her completely, on the condition that she assumed the entire mortgage and all associated debts. She had a choice: sell the house she had thrown me out of to pay the debts she now solely inherited, or find a way to pay a $3,000 a month mortgage with her part-time salary and her brother's $0 income. I heard through the grapevine, through mutual acquaintances who felt sorry for me, that they tried to hold on for a few months. Megan was forced to get a second job, then a third, but it was a losing battle. Without my substantial income, the beautiful house of cards I had built came crashing down. The bank foreclosed. They were evicted. Megan and her deadbeat brother, the man she had chosen over me, had to move back in with her parents. The ultimate walk of shame, their comfortable life evaporated. She had chosen her brother over her husband, over her family's financial stability, over everything. And in the end, she had lost us both, and everything else besides. I had my revenge, not with a shout, but with a whisper, not with a fight, but with a quiet, deliberate disappearance. I had learned the hard way that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and you can't share a life with someone who sees you not as a partner, but as a resource to be drained. I just walked away, and in doing so, I got my entire life back.